most people have. If you're following along in the scriptures, we're in John the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 11. John tells us there that, and the third day there was a marriage in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there, and Jesus also was bidden, and his disciples to the marriage. Now, the interesting thing in all of this is we don't really know whose marriage this was. We know that his mother was invited, and he was invited, and he brought with him and his disciples also to the marriage. Now, again, there's been many different thoughts and ideas. Some have supposed that it could be one of Jesus' step brothers and sisters, or half brothers and sisters, that were getting married. Main reason in that intent was that Mary took it upon herself, but again later on she'll say they have no wine, which would, again, she didn't say we, she said they. And so there's a lot of different views as to, again, why Mary and why Jesus, and again, why Jesus would bring his disciples also. However, in a Jewish wedding, it seems that the more the merrier, until you run out of wine or you don't quite prepare for it. But again, it wasn't a wedding many times like we think of. We've talked about this before. It was more or less a dinner, a feast, a celebration, and the betrothal had already taken place. And because the betrothal had already taken place, they would have worked out the details of the marriage covenant even before this. This was just the official acknowledgement and acceptance of all of those things which they had previously agreed upon. And so as to make a public statement, so as to have witnesses and others there. There's always been a lot of debate over, again, people who are living together. Are they committing adultery? Are they committing fornication? Are they married? Again, marriage is a covenant, and so if there's not a specific covenant made between those two individuals and God, generally speaking, again, to the Jewish people, that really wouldn't have been a wedding per se. And for many, again, they had various ways of establishing, again, the husband, the wife, negotiating, all the things that we see in both the Old Testament as well as the New. It is back in the area of Galilee. Jesus had been down in the area of Judea when he was interacting with John and John's disciples and some of them. And as we look here, we have this wedding, and Mary was bidden or invited. Again, here's the interesting thing, and the statement that we have here in the American Standard, it says, and the mother of Jesus was there. The question that some propose is, why was the mother of Jesus there? Was she there because it was some of her children that were getting married? Was it some type of relative that may be a little bit more extended than that? But the interesting statement that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was there. And Jesus was invited to the wedding. And generally speaking, when we have weddings today, we usually invite our family. We make sure that at least our close family and kinfolk are invited. We don't want to insult anybody. When Nina and I were getting married, we sent some invitations to the people there at the congregation, and Brother Harold got kind of upset because we didn't send him an invitation, and he was performing the wedding. So I didn't think about it. You need to do it. Once you talk to the preacher and the preacher has agreed to do the wedding, I assume that the preacher, and that's sometimes where we make our mistakes, but we assumed, and so he kind of felt put out because he didn't get a formal invitation to the wedding, even though we'd already agreed that he was doing the wedding. But the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus was bidden, and his disciples also, to the marriage. And so we have seen Andrew and Peter and Philip and Nathaniel, and with that, perhaps James and John also could have been part of the disciples at that time. Peter and Andrew were kind of working together with James and John. So they may have been there. Others may have been there also. And so, there's a lot that John says, but there's even more he doesn't say. Now, why he specifically withholds that, what the reason for that is, I don't know. But if James and John were there, then John, the writer of this book, would have been there and may very well have witnessed the things which were going on here. We remember that Jesus said that the Holy Spirit would bring to their remembrance the things that he had said and the things that they had seen and heard. And so John may very well, that again may be why John records this. John was one of the closer disciples to Jesus, and he may very well have been with Jesus or in the area of Jesus when the wine fails, when they run out. We do know that Jesus' family, from all that we can tell, were not wealthy. Everything from the sacrifice which is offered at his birth to the job that his father had, they may not have been, as some say, dirt poor, but they weren't wealthy either. And so while some may dream of a big fancy wedding, one of the Cinderella kind of weddings, again, if you're not a Rockefeller, you generally don't have $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 today to spend on a wedding. And so you have to size down and you have to cut corners. You want to do the best that you can, but there is some corner cutting. And whomever was the person at the wedding, we find that it had failed. That means that they had ran out. Never underestimate the fact at a celebration how much people are able to drink. That's an iffy situation, when I'm not going to get into whether it's alcoholic, non-alcoholic. We've discussed that before, and there are various things on the internet you can go to. But the point is, how much will every guest? Here's the thing: we're expecting 40 people. We're expecting 50 people, and so these are people who we've invited specifically. But some of them may have people that they bring with them, or we may, coming up on the wedding itself, run into somebody like we said we hadn't really thought about, and we bid them also to the wedding. And we expect that everybody will drink at least a cup, and somebody may drink 2 cups, but we also know that there's that person there who drinks from the time they get there till the time they leave, and they're like a camel that's been out in the desert for 6 weeks. They're totally parched, and they're going to fill up. So, it's very hard to judge those kind of things. And these wedding feasts sometimes went on for days. And so while you might plan for however many days the celebration was supposed to be, it was a time, an opportunity for people to lay down their work and come and be at the various feasts and celebrations. At least one day, the celebration would have been at least one day, and may have been more than that, depending on, again, how big of a celebration that it was and who was getting married and all of that. We have note here, Brother McGarvey puts in there, that probably the arrival of Christ and his disciples helped to exhaust the supply. And again, if that's the case, and again, that's just a thought, but if it's the case, it really wasn't a big wedding to start with. If Mary was going to be there anyway, and Jesus and his disciples, Jesus was also bidden. They should have already then expected Mary, and they should have expected Jesus. And I would think if Jesus was being invited, then his brothers and sisters would have been invited. And so the fact that Peter and Philip and Nathaniel and Andrew and James and John, 5 or 6 other people show up, again, that may have exhausted it. But in my kind of view of it, if that really hastened it to be exhausted, it wasn't that big of a wedding. It was more what would have been a very private celebration, more so than a larger public celebration. So again, John may say what he does and record as he does to keep from embarrassing anybody about the situation and the circumstances. Like I said, we know a little bit about Jesus' background. If this was a sister, or if it was a brother getting married, if it was a close relative of the family, whatever the situation is, Mary seems to believe that she bears some kind of burden and responsibility for fixing it. And as the wine is failing, as it begins to come down, and as they begin to exhaust that, whoever is doing this apparently had to bring that to Mary's attention, or else Mary was one of the ones who was serving at the feast and could see that the wine was becoming exhausted, and therefore she had to do something. The interesting thing that we have here is when the wine failed, that is, as it was getting down, the supply, provisions, all of that were coming dangerously close to being exhausted. This would have been a great embarrassment, when you invite people. I can remember we had a retirement dinner for one of our police officers when I was mayor, and we were giving him an award. We were giving him his gold watch, and we were giving him some awards and different things, and we invited him and his family, and of course the council and all wanted to be there, and the company that we had catered the meal, I don't know who they thought was going to be there. I think they believed that 3-year-olds were going to be the ones eating, because their serving size was based on that. And when they showed up with the food, we had to make some very quick arrangements to go rob the deli at the local supermarket of anything we could find to put out there to feed the people. It's kind of a bad deal to be having a retirement party and you're invited to a dinner, which again, the hors d'oeuvre is your whole plate. And so, we see that these things can cause embarrassments. It can cause, and especially when it's weddings, these kind of things can be something that you talk about for the next 20 years. Yeah, just like when they had that wedding. You remember that? They ran out of wine, they ran out of this, ran out. So Mary gets involved, and she comes to Jesus and says to them, they have no wine. Now, again, we could go into lots of speculations, and I'm sure lots of people have, as to why she came to him. We would assume that, of course, Jesus was her oldest son, and if she had some kind of connection or whatever, if he was taking care of her, then again, he would be the person that she came to, even if she was talking about just needing some funds to go out and buy more. But it would seem from the context that we get here, he makes an interesting statement. Verse 4, Jesus said unto her, Woman, what have I to do with thee? He doesn't call her mother, but he calls her woman. And so there's been some comments as to why he used that term. But he does say that mine hour is not yet come. And since he says that, again, people have suggested that Mary was aware that Jesus had the ability to perform miracles or do, as we'd say, special things. He had a way about him of getting things accomplished, however that was. There's a lot of questions, and this opens up. Like I said, we only have a minimal statements here. Some people, because the gift of the Spirit came to Jesus after his baptism, some have said that the miracles which Jesus performed, he performed by the Holy Spirit that was given to him when he was baptized, which means that prior to that, he did not have the ability to perform miracles and to do those kind of things, but obviously he could pray to the Father and hopefully, he would respond. But if that be the case, then it's been a relatively short period of time since Jesus has been baptized and received the gift of the Holy Spirit. And John says that God gave him the Spirit without measure, without limitations. And so again, how much Mary knew, what she may have seen him do, again, we're not really sure, but he does take it, at least by my indication here, that my hour is not yet come. And that's a statement that he uses toward the end, pointing toward the end of his ministry. We know that he had, after his baptism, been again away for 40 days in the wilderness. And then he come back out of that. He started his ministry. The interesting thing is, again, he doesn't say no, and he really doesn't say yes. It's kind of one of those interesting things. She's there talking to him, and she tells him what's going on, and he kind of asks, and again, it's been paraphrased different ways, but when he says, "What do I have to do with thee?" I mean, what concern of that? I mean, why is that our concern? And why am I the one that has to take care of it? That's the way that some people at least interpret or read that. But whether he doesn't appear to really say yes, and he doesn't appear to really say no, and it just it's like she's there, and she has some of the servants that were there working with the wedding. And it's kind of interesting that it would seem that they were standing there with her. They came with her. They may have been the one who told her that, hey, we're running out of wine. And so the servants come with her. Come with me. We'll see if we can get this fixed. So they come to Jesus. And the interesting thing is she says to the servants, whatever he saith unto you, do it. Now that's kind of interesting because, again, as I said, he doesn't really say yes and he doesn't say no. But as mamas have a way of doing, she just looks at the servants and says, whatever he tells you to do, do it. And I can just, if it was my mom, I could just pretty much see her walking off and leaving me there with, I got to do this. Whether I say yes or whether I'd say no, she expects me to do it. And so it's mama, so we've got to do that. The parting words that she says is whatsoever he saith unto you, do it. And we're told that there were 6 water pots of stone set there after the Jews' manner of purifying. And this purifying had to do with personal cleanness ceremonially, and it also had to do with the dishes and various things that were cleaned and set apart. And I'm not going to go into all the kosher laws and all that was there. But there were these 6 water pots that were sitting there that was used to remove the ceremonially uncleanness from them that they used for that. We're told that, again, there were 2 or 3 firkins apiece, and there's been various discussions about that. It says, at least here, it says that would be between 18 and 27 gallons. It says a firkin was 9 gallons. However, I've seen it much more than that on some of the other commentators. Again, really the point is there are 6 containers there that was used for purification, and the reason that John says that is this water was very special water. I know it seems strange to us, but this is a water they used for ceremonial cleansing. And so, this wasn't anything other than the water that they used for that. They wouldn't have put anything else in it, because if they'd put something else in it, again, it could have made it unclean or whatever, and then that just ruins the whole process. And so Jesus says unto them, fill the water pots with water. And we've commented on this before, but I find it very interesting. Jesus says, fill the water pots with water. Mary said, whatever he tells you to do, do it. And then John says, they filled those things all the way up to the brim. How full is full?
That's cool.
I mean, is this a full bottle of water?
Not quite.
I mean, it's not all the way to the top, but if you go to the store and buy one, is this full?
Yeah.
I mean, people would when you go in a grocery store and this is in the cooler, you know it's not filled to the brim, but you consider this to be a full bottle of water because hopefully nobody's opened it and took a swig out of it before you got there. Although I have been to a couple grocery stores that I pulled a bottle out of the cooler, and apparently an employee had been slurping on it and put the lid back on and stuck it in the bottom of the cooler. But nonetheless, we digress. But again, you don't know what full is until it's running over the top. Like Brother Richard says, I know it's full when the water's running over the top. You want whatever he says to do, do it. He said fill them, and so they filled them to the very top to where he couldn't get any more water in them. And he said to them, draw out now and bear unto the ruler of the feast, or the person who was taking care of or in charge of the wedding feast. And so we're told that that's exactly what they did. And when the ruler of the feast tasted the water, now become wine, and knew not whence it was, but the servants that had drawn the water knew, the ruler of the feast called the bridegroom and said unto him, every man setteth on first the good wine, and when men have drunk freely, that which is worse. Thou hast kept the good wine until now. When you start, I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant. By looking at me, you understand that I've been to a few. Sometimes when you order, I like generally unsweet tea. I don't put anything in it. I know a lot of people go, yuck, but that's what I drink usually when I go to the restaurants, unsweet tea. Well, the first glass comes out and it's pretty good. It's a glass of unsweet tea. But, as the meal goes on, if you ever kind of watch things, the tea gets a little thinner and thinner and thinner. What at first was a nice dark glass of tea, when they fill it up again, it's not quite as dark as it was the first time. And again, if you have 3 or 4 glasses, by the time you're finished, it just looks like somebody rinsed a dirty glass out, and there's just enough color in it. And so this is what the ruler says here, the person who's in charge of the feast. He says, it's my experience at these kind of things, when the party starts, they put out the good stuff. Tastes good, again, I'm not getting into what kind it is, but, nice, sweet, tasty, flavorful wine. And then as the party goes on, you kind of start watering it down some. You take some of the worse wine and you may mix it with some of the good wine and kind of dilute it down a little. And by the time you're finished, you're really at the dregs of wine. It's only wine in the sense of it ain't vinegar yet. And that's pretty much what he's saying. It's been my experience that people, they put out, a nice setting and everybody starts eating. And of course, when you're eating and drinking, as time goes on, your taste buds just kind of get overwhelmed. And so when people can no longer distinguish as well, then you put out the bad stuff, or the worse stuff, or the less than desirable stuff. And so he says that, but you've kept the good wine until now. You've been holding out on us. You flipped it around. We thought we were getting the good stuff, and now we taste this, and we see that you saved the best for last. And so nobody knew where this came from except, of course, Jesus and any of the disciples that were with him when it happened, and of course the servants who knew it came from the water to start with. But this is the beginning of the signs, or the miracles. The beginning of his signs did Jesus in Cana of Galilee, and manifested or made known his glory, and his disciples believed on him. And so they witnessed or saw this miracle. They may not have really experienced or had a reason to see a miracle up to this point per se, They could have, according to, again, Matthew and others. He began to do miracles as he came back out of his 40 days of being tempted and tried and tested. But his disciples most certainly at this point saw what had happened, and they knew where the water came from, and they knew various things about that. One of the evidence that a lot of people put forth that this was non-alcoholic wine is that alcohol generally tends to cause your taste buds to go to sleep. And so it deadens the taste buds. And so if they had been drinking a lot of alcoholic wine, then their tastes and their ability to distinguish all of that would have been somewhat clouded. But he's able to discern that the difference between what they had been drinking, which wasn't apparently bad, but this was the best. And so he still had a capacity to taste and to comprehend that. There's lots of discussions over, as I said, the types of biblical wines, fermented, unfermented, what constituted table wine, how it was preserved, how it was kept. And there's been a whole lot of discussion on that. We could spend hours on biblical wines and all that goes along with that. But this was the beginning. And of course, it's interesting, it's at a wedding, and so most of the Christian wedding ceremonies find a way somehow to incorporate the story, the fact that Jesus again blessed the sanctity of marriage and the institution of marriage, and that he attended that wedding in Cana of Galilee, and he performed his first public miracle, or first recorded miracle there. Now again, I'm going to we'll put a question mark there. I know most people say this was his first public miracle, and again, you have to look at the end of the 4th chapter of Matthew and all and see some of the things that are there. But as far as John is concerned, the way it's laid out, this is the first recorded miracle that we have. Does anybody have any comments or questions?
It seemed like his mother Mary knew that he could do this if he wanted to. So
and she came to him for a reason. There's no doubt that she knew he was capable one way or the other. And again, the way it plays out, again, it's open to interpretation as to whether or not she had seen miracles done by him. I know that there are some other writings that didn't get put in the New Testament, some things that were written in the early centuries. I don't know exactly what year some of them were written, but they say that they're trying to relay the early years of Jesus' life and all, and of course they have him performing miracles and raising a bird from the dead and doing all kinds of things as a kid. But I do, again, look at whether or not he really had been performing miracles before his baptism and before the Holy Spirit came upon him. And that may very well, again, help us to understand that even though Jesus was God and was with God and a part of the Godhead, he did empty himself. He came in the form of human flesh. And so in that case, it would have been the workings of the Holy Spirit speaking with him and informing him and instructing him. And a lot of the things that we see Jesus reading the hearts of others and knowing the hearts of others, again, Was that because of his own unique power, or was that because God had given him the Spirit without measure and the Spirit worked with him? And so these are questions that go along with this. And we know Jesus is doing miracles now. There's no doubt if he can turn water to wine, then he can do the other things. And as we've said, a miracle is just that. People always want to find an explanation as to how he did it. Well, again, it's not that they had wine in bags that you could tear open that was dehydrated like Kool-Aid and fill it up. Some people would like to believe that that's what they did. They try to look for some explanation of how it was that they managed to do this, not understanding that, a miracle is just that. It is the interruption of the laws of nature. And I've heard even theologians say that miracles can't break the law of nature. And by definition, that's really what a miracle is. It's the alteration of the laws of nature. I mean, how does the blind see without altering nature? How do the deaf hear without altering the laws of nature when it comes to a body? A man who has been crippled for, years, decades, how is it that they stand up and walk all at once? That doesn't have natural explanations. It has a supernatural explanation, something that goes beyond the natural things. If I have an infection and I go to the doctor and the doctor gives me an antibiotic and I take the antibiotic and the infection goes away, some people might want to claim it's a miracle, but that's not a miracle. Those are all within the scope of nature and God's providence. But, when the doctor gives up any hope and someone is restored back to their health and are even more healthier than they were before, that's a miracle. There's no way to explain it. And so John records something here in the early part of his letter that clearly shows us that Jesus was a person who had control over the things of the physical world. He was the God who in the beginning created the heaven and the earth. He was there with that in the beginning. He was with God and was God, and all things were created by him and for him. And Paul says, by him all things consist. And so it was his disciples who began to witness. And this is just, when Jesus was talking to Nathanael, he said, you're going to see greater things than this. You're amazed because, I said, I saw you under the fig tree, and I knew, maybe what your response was when you said things like, can anything good come out of Nazareth? But, he told him, if you think that's a big thing, just wait. You're going to see greater things than these. And so, this isn't exactly heaven open and the angels ascending and descending as he spoke of, but this is the beginning. And they indeed will see and did see this miracle, and they will see many miracles much greater than these.
Yeah.